They Raced Horses on Main Street, Douglas, Massachusetts, Recalling an Era, 1868 to 1908, by Anthony H. Coppola. A quote by Benjamin Franklin. The next best thing to living one's life over again seems to be the recollection of that life, and to make that recollection as durable as possible by putting it all down in writing. Acknowledgments. The author wishes to express his indebtedness and gratitude to many residents of Douglas and Blackstone Valley who saved and collected old newspapers, photographs, and letters. Had these friends and neighbors not shared generously of their time and personal collections of memorabilia, this book would not have been possible. A special note of gratitude is due Miss Grace F. Dudley and the late Lucius J. Marsh, Jr. for sharing their memories and photographs, many of which were used in this history. William A. Emerson's History of Douglas is the source for engravings depicting local activities, scenes, and buildings. Preface. Much has been written and recorded about the history of the town of Douglas since its establishment and incorporation. I have chosen to write about the ordinary, everyday lives of men and women who worked, loved, enjoyed, and participated in the rich and productive years of 1868 to 1908. This is an account of their activities, events, and happenings as reported in the local news columns during these 40 years. Anthony H. Coppola, Douglas, Massachusetts, January 1988. Introduction. East Douglas was a typical New England village in every respect. It had its general store, where an endless variety of articles were displayed for sale, ranging from a paper of pins to agricultural implements. There was a combined hotel and post office. The streets were lined with neatly painted dwellings and their carefully kept lawns. Flower gardens adorned even the plainest of cottages, and climbing vines ornamented many a veranda. The manufactories along the Mumford River, which flows through town, and the shops and stores on the main street all afforded ample evidence of its prosperous condition. The village lay about a mile back from the railroad station. The only means of transportation to and from the station consisted of several antiquated buses, which jolted and jounced over the rough road, usually amid a dust that was well nigh stifling. First part. Saloons, Liquor, and Temperance. The saloon keepers and those who frequented their establishments were having an unrestricted time selling and drinking liquor. That is, until an act of the state legislature required each community, annually, to vote for or against the sale of intoxicating liquor. At the annual town meeting of 1868, Article 6 of the warrant read, "To see what action the town will take in regard to licensing the sale of intoxicating liquors, pursuant to an act of the last legislature." The meeting was well attended, and the proceedings were well marked by a feeling of more than usual interest. Mr. William D. Jones read extracts from and explained the law, and a vigorous, spirited discussion took place between those opposed to the granting of licenses to selling intoxicating liquors and those who were in favor. The decision of the voters was yeas 36, nays 67, showing a majority of 31 against license. A license year meant that liquor could be sold by saloons as long as they had a license to do so. A no-license year was the opposite, a total ban on selling liquor anywhere, anytime. The new law and the vote for no license shattered the pleasure of those who drank, and for those who were opposed to the sale of liquor, the vote was hailed as a blessing for the community, which would put an end to saloons, drinking, and drunkards, at least until the next annual town meeting. However, the patrons of the saloons didn't quite see it in the same light. It was difficult for them to accept the fact that they could no longer quench a thirst because the voters decided it would be better for them to abstain. And the vote was equally difficult for the saloon keepers to comply with, for they had been selling liquor without restraint. So it came as no surprise that the first violation of the ban occurred only 4 months later. 3 doors down from Thayer's Block, Mr. Stephen Payne ran a restaurant in the front part of his building and sold liquor in the rear, which of course was illegal, and which did not escape the attention of the authorities, as witnessed by the following court record. Wednesday, September 30th, 1868. Stephen J. Payne, violation of the license law. A.F. Brown appeared for the Commonwealth and Russell Titus for the defendant. Fined $50 in cost. The defendant appealed and gave bonds to prosecute his appeal in the sum of $200. Sureties, one of the selectmen and E.S. Johnson of Douglas. This is the second violation of the license law, of which Mr. Payne has been convicted within 3 weeks and paid $50 and costs on each. G.W. Spencer, publisher and editor of the Douglas Herald newspaper in which the above item appeared, saw fit to add these words. The way of the transgressor is hard. Wonder if friend Payne likes the new license law. It is said that politics makes strange bedfellows. So does rum. Payne was defended in his illegal sale of liquor by the president of one of the temperance societies and bailed out by one of the fathers of the town. In 1874, a Union Temperance Society was organized with meetings held on the last Sabbath of each month. Through the earnest efforts of the members and the president, the meetings soon assumed unusual interest, were also well attended, and did much to aid the cause of temperance in the community. 1870s to early 1880s. Now the battle lines were drawn. The saloon keepers and the temperance people campaigned vigorously, and the intensity grew with each passing year, always starting a couple of months before the annual town meeting. The ardent campaigns of the opposing groups brought to an end the peaceful and pleasant atmosphere of the town. The temperance people were the TU, Temperance Union, the WCTU, Women's Christian Temperance Union, and the Reform Club, and a secret committee of 8 persons. The members of the Reform Club, who were once addicted to the use of intoxicating liquor, worked hard in their attempts to reform others in the community. The TU and the WCTU held meetings and social affairs to further their battle against the use of liquor, while the secret committee interviewed voters, held rallies, and sent out literature to every voter in the town. The campaign of the no-license groups, aided by the church pastors, received much attention from the newspapers and the public. The groups held many affairs to persuade the citizens to vote against license. The largest of these were the rallies, which featured speakers of statewide reputation who were staunch foes of selling intoxicating liquor. 1888 to 1908. In observance of Temperance Day, Reverend James Elvin of the Second Congregational Church made references to the phases of the rum question and sadly stated that the saloon keeper wields a great deal of influence in the local political life. Reverend Elvin, who was a strong supporter of a no-license campaign, supplied most of the energy and the ideas, best of which was the button seen on every schoolboy and schoolgirl. In the center of the button was a picture, usually of a round-faced little girl, with her bulky hair parted in the middle and hanging in 2 opposite waves over her forehead. Around the picture was the plea, printed on a red or white background, "Vote no, for my sake." On some of the buttons was a picture of a little boy. These buttons were not only distributed among pupils of the East Douglas schools, including the high school, but also sent to the schools in the remote places in the town. One day during 1901, a startling statement was made by a man that anyone who wished could get liquor in 26 places in town. Kitchen bar rooms sprang up, and together with saloons sold as much liquor during the no license as they did during the license year. The kitchen bar rooms were frequently visited by old friends and also by many new ones. It seemed that many no-license voters voted license thinking, it seemed that many no-license voters voted license thinking it was just as well for the town to get a few $1,000s out of it. If that were not so, then it would have been no trouble to carry the town for no license. The temperance people remarked that the town should raise a few $100s to fight the illegal traffic, and then get out the town officers to do the business, as some of the Douglas officers, although willing to do their duty as they saw fit, were afraid to interfere for fear they would not be reelected to office. The no-license groups were so determined to stop the sale of intoxicating liquor that one day in the mid-1880s, a militant group of women in town, who were very much opposed to the sale of liquor and called themselves the Praying Band, burst into Simpson's saloon and delivered to him a lecture on the evils of strong drink, telling him where those who sold it went after they left this world. Simpson became so agitated that he was seized with a stroke and died soon after. The policy of those against license warned the voters not to arouse the rum sellers to a disagreeable activity on town meeting day. And when the town meeting voted license, the no-license group made stinging remarks, as every day we see the drunkards who stagger down the street. We have no patience with such people and would like to see a few of them hanged as an example to the rest. And our saloon keeper across the river is wearing a smile that won't come off. He has received satisfactory assurances that should the town vote yes, there will be no trouble in renewing his license. In fact, he is absolutely certain to get a license, while it is very doubtful about some of the other applicants. No wonder he turned school teacher. No wonder he worked so hard on registration day. He well knows on which side his bread is buttered. So he smiles. Sometimes he grins. Also, wouldn't it make you laugh to see the way the saloon keepers worked last Saturday, scratching up every Tom, Dick, and Harry, drunk and sober? Some underage, but all got on the voting list. When the votes are challenged election day, there will be serious charges for some to face. One man failed to get on the last minute because he couldn't read, although the big jovial saloon keeper across the river had been teaching him for the past week. In the early 1900s, a couple of detectives put in a day or so in East Douglas getting evidence to prove that rum was being sold illegally. What the results of their investigations were and what prosecutions were intended developed in time. The members of the East Douglas No License Committee, at whose instance the sleuth work was done, refused to talk about the matter. The rum sellers wondered what was to come. The East Douglas No License Committee was formed in secret. Its personnel was never given out, and its plans were laid in secret. It promised before the annual town meeting in March that it would continue to fight rum throughout the years. It was learned that 2 detectives were in East Douglas on Memorial Day, that they hired a rig from the stable of Joseph T. Durham, proprietor of the hotel, and they called themselves buyers of eggs, or some such unromantic product. Deputy Sheriff Edwin P. Heath said that so far as he knew, the detectives worked by themselves and without any connection with Douglas officers. The rallies staged by the no-license groups were the highlight of every campaign. At one such rally, 400 persons climbed 2 flights of stairs and crammed Thayer's Hall to attend the rally led by the pastors of the village, Reverend James Elvin and Reverend Charles W. Haymond. The ministers acted fairly in the matter, avoided all slush, and held the issues down to the questions at stake. License or no license? They claimed that this was not a question of prohibition or temperance, but simply was a licensed saloon for the best interests of the community. In regard to law enforcement, the No License Committee stated that it believed kitchen bar rooms could be closed and the proprietors heavily punished, and they promised the voters that every effort will be made to enforce the law whether the town gave license or no license. The attendance at the rally was great, due in good measure to the Catholics, who were very fond of their leader, Honorable John T. Shea of Cambridge, the principal speaker. In 1906, he ranked among the best orators and advocates in the state on the no license question. The audience gave close attention to the interesting and stirring speech of Honorable J.T. Shea. The rally was the biggest affair of its kind ever held in East Douglas, and large delegations from Douglastown, the South Douglas, were present. The pleasant orchestra of East Douglas furnished the music, which was lively enough to make the folks sit up and listen. Throughout these years, the patrons and saloon keepers countered the no-license people by simply doing nothing. That is, nothing which got attention from the newspapers. The saloon keepers waged a quiet and practically unseen campaign which was extraordinarily effective. They worked diligently and exerted every effort, the major one being the constant reminder to their patrons that a no-license vote would close down the saloons. That was a frightening prospect, which would cause a great deal of discomfort to the patrons. No longer would they be able to regularly visit the saloon for a drink or drinks over which they discussed topics of the day, events, and most important to their enjoyment and well-being, the question of license or no license. The only time the saloon keepers went all out, regardless of denunciation by the no-license groups, was when they held open house on town meeting day, even though the sale of liquor on that day was prohibited by law. The Saloon, 1877. What place does Satan like the best? Where does he sit and smile and rest, and plant the greatest social pest? At the saloon. Where do we find the liquid fire, where hope and joy and life expire, where bloody hellish deeds transpire? At the saloon. Stand firm, ye friends of truth and right, take God's armor, march and fight, the victory gain through moral might, or the saloon. During the license years, and especially the no-license years, there were searches, raids, arrests, and fines for illegally selling porter, ale, wine, rum, and whiskey. Deputy Sheriff Edward P. Heath, assisted by his 4 constables and at times aided by officers from Northbridge, did their best in attempts to enforce the law. However, some righteous citizens who took the constabulary to task charged that there were a large number of people in town who did not want the law enforced. They said that more convictions with good-sized fines would make life pleasanter for the better class of people. And they also stated that the way liquor laws were violated was a disgrace to the community. However, these criticisms did not in any way deter the officers from carrying out their prescribed duties. One afternoon between 2:30 and 3 o'clock, Deputy Sheriff Heath and two of his constables, Charles C. Labrie and Willie Menahan, raided Durham's Hotel on Main Street. They took 14 bottles of lager from an icebox in a dark storeroom, back of the barroom, and kept them as evidence for charges against Joseph T. Durham, proprietor of the hotel, of illegally keeping liquor. Then, about 9 o'clock in the evening, on another day in 1907, four constables, Willie Menahan, Simon P. Valaire, Herbert Hughes, and Charles C. Labrie, raided the house of Joseph LaBelle, across the river, with a search warrant for liquor. They found 4 men in the kitchen, but no liquor. They searched all the rooms on the first floor, also the cellar and the barn. Mr. LaBelle, known as Fatty LaBelle, received the officers affably, passed around cigars, and offered them soda. A gentleman of Douglas was given 3-month sentence in district court for drunkenness. He was in court 10 days earlier on the same charge and was on probation. He told the court his story and hoped he would be again placed on probation as he had experienced religion and thought he could do better. The officer told the court that it was queer praying as he could hear the man for a quarter of a mile and that he was mostly swearing. Judge Putnam, who had handled Douglas drunks for the last 30 years, told him that the court had lost confidence in him and that he had better go to a place where he could pray in peace and not get drunk. The license years, and in particular the no-license years, not only disrupted life in the community, but were also disappointing for travelers, visitors, and groups who came here to provide entertainment. This sad state of affairs in Douglas also affected some persons in adjoining towns, which could have prompted the following lament. The way was long and dreary, as onward they strode, a weary Tim and Willie, along the dusty road. Hungry, faint, and thirsty, yet blithe of heart they were, for shining in the distance the lights of Douglas lay. O cruel lights of Douglas, if beer your lights could drown, your victim's thirst would punish it, O lights of Douglas town. The score for no license or license during this 40-year period, 1868 to 1908, stood just about half and half. Liquor was sold legally and illegally, license or no license, law or no law. The deputy sheriff and his constables were unable to stem, let alone stop the sale of rum, ale, whiskey, and other beverages. The campaigns of the temperance people and the no-license groups were also ineffective because the desire for intoxicating liquors overpowered the law and the town meeting vote. Still, all was not lost, for the townspeople did get certain benefits during the license years. The license money, so-called, was used to improve the sidewalks and other things in the village, which contributed to the convenience of all citizens, including the no-license groups who fought so vigorously. The Temperance Pledge, from Our Home Journal, July 1877. The following is the pledge of the Women's Christian Temperance Union of East Douglas. We, the undersigned, severally pledge ourselves upon our integrity to abstain from all spirituous and malt liquors, including wine, cider, and beer, as a beverage, that we will not offer in any way the same to others to be so used, or use the same for cooking or for table purposes. This is a strong pledge, is already signed by the goodly list of prominent wives, mothers, and sisters in the community, and if it be faithfully kept by them, and those who may soon accept the same pledge, we shall expect to see a marked advance in temperance interests. We count the Women's Christian Temperance Union as one of the most promising signs of the times, a unifying of the womanhood, of the commonwealth in a home battle against the domestic traditions and culinary habits of many homes. The social glass, the wine-spiced sauces, and the alcohol-poisoned foods will, we trust, be soon tabooed from the higher classes of the society, and all lower ranks will follow the good example. Hiram Walker. Hiram Walker was born in Douglas on the 4th of July, 1816, in the Walker homestead on U Street. He left Douglas at the age of 20 to join the great exodus to the west. In Detroit, Michigan, during the 1840s, his business was in wholesale groceries and beverages as well, and was advertising good wheat whiskey for sale at low prices by the gallon. In the 1850s, he moved to Ontario, Canada, where he would have no problem with the American prohibitionists and built what was to become the largest distillery on the continent. While the distilleries of Hiram Walker were satisfying the thirst of practically all of North America, back in his hometown of Douglas, the temperance and no-license groups were fiercely battling to stop the sale of liquor. This native son of Douglas, who built his empire in Canada because of the prohibitionists, became a famous person. He never returned to Douglas.